Hi, I'm Jennifer Armentrout, Fine Cooking's Senior Food Editor and Test Kitchen Manager. Today I'm going to show you how to French a rack of lamb. Frenching a rack of lamb basically means to take a whole unfrenched rack of lamb and turn it into this. And all I've done here is taken away the meat and the fat from in between the first few inches of bone. It just gives it a cleaner look, especially once it's roasted. If you have a good butcher near you, you can get them to do that for you, but it's actually a sort of a satisfying butchering task that you can do at home too. The first step is to cut a straight line down the length of the rack. I'm going to position it about 2 to 3 inches away from the ribeye meat here. There is a good bit of meat in here that's sort of nice to gnaw on once you have the roasted bones. So I'm going to cut clear down to the bones, just using a fair amount of pressure. This rack happens to have a bit of the shoulder blade still in it, but I was able to cut clear through it. So if you find that your rack also has one, don't worry about it yet. We're going to get it out later. If you can't cut through the shoulder bone, you can also just remove it right now. So step 2 is to use the line that you just cut here as a guide, and then you're going to pierce through in between the bones. Just clear through and try to get your knife, right in between the bones. And just continue down the length between each one. The knife I'm using is a boning knife. It's thin-bladed, fairly sharp. It gives me a good amount of agility and flexibility in moving around the bones. Okay, step 3 is to score the membrane off the bones here. You start at the point where you pierced through. I'm using a fair amount of pressure to really cut down to the bones. It's going to help the membrane come free in a moment. Now is the part where you really need to use some elbow grease. I'm going to be bending the meat back from the bones here, so I have my thumbs in between the bones and my fingers on the back where the meaty side is. And I just use a fair amount of pressure to pop this back. It might take you a little while, just keep at it. Some racks are easier to do than others. If you find that you're having a little bit of resistance, you can also go back and score again, because maybe you just didn't score it quite well enough at the beginning. Like this one's giving me a little bit of a problem. Once you get down to the point where you had pierced through, you'll see that the strip of meat starts to pull away on its own. Yeah, it's a little gruesome, but we're going to clean it up. Once you've got it mostly cleared away, you just can come back and shave off that last piece of meat. Maybe cut that off too. Now you want to clean up the bones a little bit and get any last remaining membrane bits of meat off of there. There are a couple of different ways you can do it. I usually use a combo of both. First is just using the knife to kind of cut around, get those little bits, the bigger bits. And you can also scrape with the back of the knife. And the last technique is to use a clean cloth and just sort of pull along. Maybe use your fingernail to sort of scrape off those bits of membrane. And you just keep at it. All right, last step. There's a whole layer of fat and meat that's on top of the eye of the rack, and that's actually scrap. It needs to come off, and it'll just peel right off in one layer. If it's really holding on, then a knife to just free things up. And down at the bottom, you might need to cut it off. Should your rack of lamb have this row of bones still attached to it, you're going to want to trim those off because they'll get in the way of carving the rack into chops.